cold came first. It always did on Havel 7. Wind moved across the frozen plains like something alive, pushing loose snow into long white ribbons that curled and broke apart before they reached the rock walls of the human settlement. The sky above was the color of old iron. 3 suns hung low on the horizon, giving light without warmth. It was not a place that welcomed anything. Soro did not mind the cold. He was copper and amber from nose to tail, small for his kind, and 4 centuries old, which made him barely a juvenile among the Drail. His kind lived in the deep warmth of dying stars when they wanted comfort. A frozen frontier world was nothing. He tucked his wings flat against his back and crouched lower behind the ridge, watching. Below him, the human settlement sat in the snow like something stubborn. Prefab structures bolted together against the wind, lights burning in every window even in daytime. Machines moving ore from the ground to the loading docks, and humans moving around all of it, shouting things to each other, breath fogging in the cold. Elder Vayek had given him the same instruction 4 times in the past 2 days. Observe, record, do not make contact. Soro understood. The sacred laws were not suggestions. Non-entanglement was the oldest and most absolute of all of them. A Tier 1 species did not speak to a Tier 7 species. It did not interact, assist, interfere, or involve itself. The gap between Tier 1 and Tier 7 was not a distance of rank. It was a distance of history, of power, of responsibility. The Conclave had written those laws before humanity's ancestors had discovered fire. Soro watched and recorded and did not make contact. Then the silo fell. It was not dramatic. One support strut buckled under ice stress, the whole structure leaned, and the side panel gave way with a sound like a gunshot. Survey equipment scattered across the snow. 3 humans ran toward it shouting. 2 more ran away from it shouting. Someone triggered an alarm, and the alarm shouted too. Soro's recording lens tracked the movement automatically. Then it stopped on something still. In the space where the silo wall had been, sitting on an overturned crate with her boots in the snow and a broken piece of survey equipment in her lap, was a child. She looked approximately 9 years old. She had a thick coat that was too big for her, dark eyes, and the expression of someone who had just been given an interesting puzzle. She was not crying. She was not running. She was turning the broken equipment over in her hands and looking at the inside of it the way Soro sometimes looked at unfamiliar star formations, with the particular attention of someone who wanted to understand a thing, not just observe it. 2 adults reached her quickly, checked her for injuries, found none, and pulled her upright. She let them, still looking at the broken piece in her hand. One of the adults said something. She nodded. She was fine. She had always been fine. She seemed faintly disappointed that the examination was interrupting her study of the equipment. Then she looked up. Not at the adults, not at the ruined silo, up and to the left at the ridge. At Soro. He had forgotten to cloak. He realized this at the exact moment her eyes found him. She was too far away for him to read her expression with any certainty, but he could read the posture. She was not afraid. She was not screaming, not pointing, not alerting the adults beside her. She raised one hand, and she waved at him. It was a small, simple wave, the kind one gives to someone across a room, a greeting between equals, easy and unhurried. Soro did not wave back. He also did not move. 11 seconds passed. He counted them precisely because later he would need to explain to himself why he had simply stayed there, visible, frozen behind a ridge on a frozen world, while a 9-year-old human child waved at him as though he were a neighbor she had spotted from across the road. Then one of the adults looked up. Soro cloaked and dropped behind the ridge. He pressed himself flat into the rock and did not breathe for 30 seconds. When he rose and looked again, the child was being walked back toward the settlement. She looked over her shoulder once, in his direction, then turned forward and walked with the adults without protest. He returned to the observation ship. Elder Vayek was reviewing atmospheric data and did not look up. Soro set his recording device down. He did not report the contact. He told himself it was because there was nothing to report. She had waved. He had not responded. No exchange had occurred. No law had been broken. He was being precise. That night he reviewed the recording. He watched the wave. He watched her eyes find him with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided she was not afraid before she had even fully seen him. He watched it again. He told himself he was analyzing the behavioral data. He watched it 39 more times. The ship's internal clock moved from late cycle to early cycle, and he did not notice. In the morning, Elder Vayek announced their departure window in 3 days. Soro looked out at the frozen plains and the iron sky and the stubborn lights of the human settlement burning through the dark. He decided, quietly, in the way of decisions that feel small and turn out not to be, that he would observe from the ridge one more time before they left. Just once, from a distance, purely professional. The cold did not bother him. He went. The stones were already there when he arrived. Soro had come to the ridge cloaked, silent, moving low across the terrain, the way young Drail were trained to move when observing, no wing noise, no thermal signature, no trace. He had been careful. He had been professional. He crouched behind the same flat rock as before and prepared to observe for exactly 1 hour. There was a row of small stones on top of the rock. 7 of them arranged in a neat line from left to right, each one different. White, grey, banded green, pale blue, dull red, deep orange, and one that was amber so dark it was almost brown. Each one had a small square of paper pressed beneath it, folded and labeled in handwriting that was careful and slightly crooked, the way a child writes when they are trying very hard to be neat. He read the labels without touching them. Cloud Rock, boring one but smooth, found near the drill, too cold to hold long. Mum says it's iron, kinda pretty. And under the amber one, the last in the row, a label that read, for the orange flying thing that waved back. Soro went very still. He reviewed his memory of the previous day with the full precision available to a 400-year-old Drail. He had not waved back. He was certain. He had frozen for 11 seconds, cloaked, and dropped behind the ridge. There had been no wave. His memory did not lie. He looked at the label again. For the orange flying thing that waved back. He picked up the amber stone. He told himself he was collecting a geological sample. The paper beneath it had one more thing written on it, smaller, at the bottom. I know you're here again. He heard a footstep. He turned and she stepped out from behind a secondary rock formation 4 meters to his left, grinning the way people grin when a plan has worked exactly as intended. She had been hiding there. She had set the stones on the rock, hidden herself, and waited. A 9-year-old human child had just run surveillance on a Drail initiate observer. He was so entirely unprepared for this that he remained uncloaked, visible, and held the amber stone in his smallest claw like evidence of a crime. She looked at him with the patient satisfaction of someone who had all the time in the world. She was shorter than his shoulder. Her coat was still too big. She had a hat pulled down over her ears, and she was carrying a second stone, a white one, smooth, turning it over in her fingers the way she had turned the broken equipment the day before. She said, "What's your name?" He should not have answered. The list of reasons not to answer was long, ancient, and written into the foundational law of the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy. He answered. His name in Drail had no clean translation. The closest meaning in any human language was something like the one whose path has not yet been decided, which his elders used with a sigh and which he had always felt was accurate in ways they did not intend as compliments. She listened to the sound of it. Then she said, "That's too long, I'll call you Soro." He opened his mouth to say that was not his name. He closed it. It was, he realized, a much better name than the Psy his elders used. "Soro," she said again, testing it, "I'm Nadia." They stood in the snow on a frozen world at the edge of mapped space, and she did not run, and he did not leave. 2 hours passed. He learned things. She was 9 3/4, and the 3/4 mattered. She had been on Havel 7 for 14 months, which was almost her whole school year, which meant she had no classmates and her mother taught her lessons on a tablet in the evenings. She had read everything on the tablet twice. She had started reading her mother's geology manuals out of desperation, which was how she knew what iron ore looked like. She had been watching the ridge since yesterday because she had decided the orange flying thing was shy and would come back, and she was right. She asked if he had ever touched snow. He admitted he had not. He had observed it. He knew its molecular composition, its formation process, its behavior under pressure and wind. He had never touched it. She looked at him as though this was the saddest thing she had heard all month. She bent down, packed snow into a ball with her mittened hands, and handed it to him. He held it in the tip of one claw. It was very cold. It was very small. It was the most immediately physical thing he had touched in roughly 2 decades, because Drail of his rank spent most of their time observing from a distance, and Elder Vayek frowned on unnecessary tactile engagement with the observed environment. "Your turn," she said. He made a snowball. It was too large. She laughed, and the sound of it went out across the flat white silence of the plains and did not echo, just faded into the cold, clean air. He taught her 3 words in Drail. She mispronounced all of them in ways that were technically incorrect and somehow immediately more interesting than the correct versions. When the light began to shift toward the settlement's meal cycle, she stood up and brushed snow from her coat. She said she had to go back. She said she would be here tomorrow. She said it the way people state facts, not asking, not inviting, just noting a thing that was going to happen. He said nothing. She picked up the white stone she had been carrying and set it on the flat rock next to the empty space where the amber one had been. Then she walked back toward the settlement without looking over her shoulder. He still had the amber stone in his claw. He told himself he would return it tomorrow. He told himself he would also, tomorrow, remember to cloak before she arrived. He told himself many things on the walk back to the observation ship. Elder Vayek's departure window was now in 2 days. Soro did not sleep that night either. 4 months after the observation team left Havel 7, a compliance officer arrived to find out why Soro had not been on it. His name was Osek. He was tall, thin, and insect-like in the way that certain conclave species with 4 arms, pale compound eyes, a voice that buzzed slightly at the edges. He had worked in compliance for 30 years and had never once filed an incomplete report. He arrived on Havel 7 with a data tablet, a formal summons scroll, and the quiet confidence of a being who had handled difficult situations before. He was not prepared for this one. The first sign was the human woman who answered his inquiry at the settlement gate. Her name was Dara Wren. She was a geologist, tired in the way that people who work very hard and sleep too little are tired, and she had a direct way of looking at things. Osek told her he was looking for a young Drail who had last been reported in this sector. She said, "You mean Soro? He's on the East Ridge with Nadia, back by meal time usually." She said it the way one reports the location of a child who has gone to play, usual, expected, part of the day. Osek filed the first note in his report before he had even stepped inside. He found Soro on the East Ridge with Nadia. They were doing something with rocks. Nadia was explaining the mineral composition of a banded green stone, and Soro was listening with the focused attention of someone being told something genuinely new, which it was not. Soro knew more about mineral composition than the entire human geology department, but he was listening because she was explaining it, and that, apparently, was different. Osek stood at the base of the ridge for a moment. Then he opened his tablet and began his count. Sustained contact with a lower-tier species, Law 1. Voluntary disclosure of species identity, Law 4. Accepting a material gift. He noted the amber stone worn around Soro's neck on a wire braid, Law 9. Use of Drail thermal ability to benefit a lower-tier being. He had found the survey report from 3 weeks ago when a storm had hit the eastern side of the settlement and one shelter had lost heating. The shelter had not lost heat. Someone had kept it warm from outside through 6 hours of blizzard, Law 12. Teaching sacred Drail language to an unvetted species, Law 17. He stopped counting at 17 because the tablet was full and he needed a second document. He interviewed Nadia first. She sat across from him in the settlement's small common room with her hands in her lap and answered every question clearly and without hesitation. She told him that Soro was her friend. She told him that she had known he was there before she set the stones out, because she had been watching the ridge and she had seen something copper-colored that was trying very hard not to be seen. She told him that she had not been afraid, because he was small, smaller than most things on the ridge, and because something that is trying to hide is not trying to attack you. Osek asked if she understood that what Soro had done was against conclave law. She said she understood that now, yes. She said she had not known it when they first talked, but that Soro had explained it later, about 3 weeks in. He had told her that what he was doing was against rules older than her planet's recorded history. Osek asked what she had said when Soro told her this. She thought about it for a moment. She said she had told him that very old rules are sometimes very wrong rules, and that was usually why someone had to break them first. Osek wrote this down. He interviewed Dara Ren next. She told him she had first noticed Soro approximately 6 weeks after the observation team left, when Nadia started spending every afternoon on the East Ridge. She said she had walked out one evening to find her daughter sitting next to a copper and amber dragon, both of them looking at the same star formation, while Nadia explained the names humans had given each one. She said she had stood there for a while and then gone back inside and made supper. Osek asked if she had been concerned. Dara Ren said she had been on a frozen frontier world for 14 months with one other adult and no children Nadia's age within 40 light minutes. She said concerned was a complicated word. She said Nadia was happy, was learning things, was sleeping properly for the first time since they arrived, and that the dragon had once kept her shelter warm through a 6-hour blizzard without being asked and without wanting anything in return. She looked at Osek. She said, "You tell me which part I should have stopped." Osek did not answer. He wrote it all down. He interviewed Soro last. Soro did not offer excuses. He sat on the ridge in the cold, late afternoon light, and Osek stood below him with his tablet and his 17 violation report and his formal summons scroll. Soro looked at the scroll. He said he would attend the hearing. He said it without the resignation of someone accepting punishment. He said it the way someone says they will finish a task. Osek asked him why he had done it, not procedurally, actually. Soro looked out at the settlement. The lights were coming on in the windows as the sky went dark. One window had a small handprint in the condensation on the glass, pressed there by a child who had stood at the window looking for something on the ridge. He said, "She needed someone, I was there." Osek looked at the window. He looked at his tablet. He closed it. On his way back through the settlement, Nadia handed him a stone, a pale blue one, smooth on one side. She said it was for his trip. She said traveling felt better with something in your pocket. He held it. He did not give it back. He filed his report that night. Every violation, every date, every detail, precise and complete. He also wrote 3 additional pages that the report form did not ask for. He titled them Contextual Observations. He had never written contextual observations in 30 years. He sent it all to the conclave. Then he sat in his ship with the pale blue stone in his 4-fingered hand and stared at the wall for a long time. The conclave's high chamber had no windows. It was built that way deliberately. The founders believed that decisions of law should not be influenced by the weather, the stars, or anything that reminded a judge that the universe was larger than the room. The walls were smooth, pale stone. The light came from sources that had no visible origin, and the 7 seats of the founding representatives were arranged in a half-circle above the floor, so that whatever stood before them always stood lower. Soro stood on the floor and looked up at 7 faces. Elder Vaic was third from the left. He had not looked at Soro since he entered. His expression was the specific stillness of someone who has decided not to have an expression. The head representative was a Velkind elder named Sorath, not a name Soro would use aloud, as the Vel communicated through form, not sound. Its shape right now communicated patience. The patience of something very old that has done this before many times and expects the same result. The charge list was read by a small automated voice that took 9 minutes. Soro listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When it was finished, there was a silence, and then Sorath's shape shifted into something that functioned as a question. A translator spoke. "Do you dispute any of the listed violations?" Soro said, "No." Sorath shifted again. The translator said, "Do you understand the harm these violations represent?" Soro said, "I understand what the conclave believes the harm to be. I would like to ask a question if the chamber will permit it." The chamber permitted it, with the slow tolerance of a body that had already decided the outcome and saw no danger in the process. Soro asked his question. He asked the chamber to name one case, just one case from any cycle in the conclave's recorded history where enforcement of Law 1 through Law 20 had prevented actual harm, not theoretical harm, not precedent harm, not the kind of harm that exists in legal language. A case where a bond between species had been broken by force of law and something bad had been stopped. The silence after this was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of patience, the silence of a room that has been asked something it did not prepare for. Sorath's shape did not shift for several seconds. The other representatives were still. Soro did not press, he waited. He had 4 centuries of practice at waiting. Finally, Elder Vayak spoke. His voice was low, in the way of old Drail, not volume, but weight. He said, "The laws were written at first contact. When we encountered species we did not understand, when the distances between kinds were not yet known, and we were afraid of what closeness might cost." Soro looked at him. It was the first time Vayak had met his eyes. Vayak continued, "Fear made the laws. This is not something we say in this chamber, but it is true." Sorath's form shifted sharply. Vayak was unmoved. Soro said quietly, "Fear is not the same as wisdom, even when it is very old." No one in the chamber said anything for a long time. Then the deliberation came. Representatives exchanged forms and sounds, and the translated summary of it was this. Soro was not wrong about the history. He was also not within the law. The conclave could not imprison a Drail, not without consequences that would fracture 4 species alliances immediately. What they could do was censure him formally, strip his initiate rank, and place him under observation for 5 cycles. He would also not return to Havel 7. The word "also" carried all the weight in that sentence. Soro listened to the full offer. He thought about the pale iron sky of Havel 7. He thought about a child setting stones in a row on a flat rock in the snow, certain the orange flying thing would come back, certain enough to wait. He said, "I accept the censure. I accept the stripped rank." A pause. "I won't accept the ban." The chamber shifted. Several representatives made sounds. Sorath's form expanded slightly in a way the translator did not attempt to render. Soro kept his voice even. He said he was aware of what he was saying. He said he understood it was not what the chamber wanted. He said that he had made a promise to a child, that he had made it freely and in full knowledge of the laws he was breaking, and that he intended to keep it. He said a promise made to a child carried a weight the law had not thought to measure, and that was not the child's problem or his, it was the law's. He looked at Elder Vayak. Vayak looked back at him. Something moved in the old dragon's eyes. Not approval, something quieter and harder to name. Soro turned and walked toward the chamber door. The representatives were still talking. No one stopped him. Stopping a Drail physically was not something anyone in the room was prepared to attempt, and everyone knew it. He stepped out into the corridor of the conclave station, which had windows unlike the chamber, and through them he could see the curve of the planet Parath below, green and brown, and ringed with the white lines of cloud. He thought about a different planet, smaller, colder, with iron skis and a child who had waited on a ridge in the snow because she had decided he was shy and would come back. He was going back. The consequences of that could be sorted later. He had been sorting consequences his entire life. He was good at it. Behind him, the chamber doors remained closed. Somewhere inside them, Elder Vayek was very quiet, in the way of someone who is not as angry as they expected to be. Soro landed on Havel 7 on a grey afternoon, 3 weeks after walking out of the Conclave's high chamber. He expected to find the settlement as he had left it, small, cold, stubborn against the wind. He did not expect to find 43 humans standing in the snow outside the main gate. They had come from 3 different outposts across the sector. Some had traveled 6 hours by ground transport. 2 had borrowed a survey shuttle to get here faster. They were dressed in cold-weather gear, and they were holding, between them, a collection of handwritten signs and one very large piece of survey tarp on which someone had painted words in block letters with orange sealant paint, because it was the only paint available. The tarp said, "We heard, we're here." Soro landed at a distance and looked at this for a moment. One of the humans raised a hand in greeting, then a few more did, then all of them, in a wave, the same gesture Nadia had made from across a ruined silo 4 months ago. He understood, in that moment, that she had told people. He did not know if he should be alarmed by this or not. Nadia appeared at the settlement gate, ran across the snow without her coat again, and crashed into his side with both arms as wide as she could get them around his copper-scaled shoulder. She was grinning so hard it looked like it might hurt. He wrapped one wing around her. He could feel her laughing. Her mother appeared at the gate, holding the coat, with the expression of someone watching a child do something completely expected and completely exhausting and completely fine. The humans in the crowd did not push forward. They gave him space, which he appreciated. They simply stood there in the cold with their signs and their tarp, present in the blunt, physical way that humans were present when they had decided something mattered. What he did not know yet, what Osek was in the process of discovering inside the settlement, was how they had found out. Osek had been reassigned to the settlement as an independent observer pending the Conclave's next decision. He had filed his resignation from the compliance office 3 days after submitting his report. He had taken the observer post because it was offered, and also because he had nowhere else in particular to be, and also because he had unfinished contextual observations to complete. He was now staring at a comm terminal, reading logs he did not understand, because the Conclave's proceedings were classified at a security level that should have been entirely inaccessible to a species that had been in space for 11 years. The humans had bypassed it. Not aggressively, not with malice. The frontier settlers had a relay network for sharing survey data and emergency information, and someone had connected a passive listener to the Conclave's administrative frequency because they had noticed it overlapped with their mining equipment's calibration band. They had been picking up fragments for months. When Soro's hearing was filed, the fragments became a complete picture, and the complete picture moved through the relay network from outpost to outpost in approximately 4 hours. 2,300 humans read the hearing summary before the Conclave was aware it had been shared. The petition arrived at the Conclave Administrative Office 7 days later. It was 3 pages long. It was written in plain language, addressed formally, and argued with the kind of clarity that comes from people who have something specific to say and no patience for saying it any other way. It argued that the sacred laws had never accounted for children, that children of any species were a particular category, separate from adults, because children did not choose their bonds, bonds chose them. It argued that a law which could not make room for a child having a friend was not a law of civilization, but a law of fear dressed in old language. It also noted, in the second page, that 2,300 signatures represented a statistically significant portion of humanity's current off-world population, and that the Conclave might wish to consider what message its response would send to a species that was still deciding how it felt about joining galactic governance. That last paragraph had been written by Dara Wren. The petition's final signatory was Osek, former compliance officer, current independent observer, who had added his name at the bottom with a note that read, "I was present. I am signing as a witness to what I observed, not to what I was asked to document." He had submitted his copy from the settlement's terminal. At approximately the same time, the 43 humans were driving across frozen plains to stand in the snow with a tarp. Inside the settlement now, he was reading 12 follow-up responses from conclave scholars who had obtained copies of the petition through channels he didn't want to investigate and had written academic papers about the human response to the situation. One called it an unexpectedly sophisticated application of moral framework to institutional law. Another called it instinctive justice reasoning of a kind not previously documented in a Tier 7 species. A third had submitted a 40-page formal request to have humanity's tier classification reviewed on the grounds that Tier 7 no longer appears to reflect the full picture. Osek read all of this. He ate the terrible dried food the settlement had offered him, which he had developed a habit of accepting because refusing it felt wrong, and he read. Outside, in the snow, Soro sat with Nadia at his side and 43 humans in front of him who had driven hours across a frozen world to stand in the cold and make sure he knew they were paying attention. A woman near the front called out, "We didn't think it was right." A man beside her said, "The law was stupid." Nadia said, from Soro's side, "I told them you were coming back." He looked down at her, "You were certain?" She looked up at him with the expression she always had when he asked questions that seemed obvious to her. "You promised," she said, "so yes." He did not have an answer to this. He was finding, more and more, that she left him without answers, not because she was difficult, but because she made things simple, and simplicity had a way of cutting through everything he thought he understood. The gray afternoon deepened. The 3 suns dropped. Humans went inside in small groups, but some stayed, sharing hot drink from containers they had brought, talking in the easy way of people who have made a journey together and are not yet ready for it to end. The conclave had not yet responded to the petition. It would soon, one way or another it would. But for now, on a cold frontier world at the edge of mapped space, a tiny copper dragon sat in the snow with a human child under his wing, and 43 humans with a tarp stood in the dark and drank something warm, and Osek ate dried food and read scholarship about humanity that made him feel, quietly, that he had not made a mistake. The galaxy did not notice. It would, though. Soon. 2 months later, Nadia figured out how to glide. It had taken 11 attempts, one near accident involving a snow ridge, and a long conversation in which Soro explained the physics of Drail flight in as much detail as a 9-year-old could absorb, which turned out to be quite a lot. She had strapped herself to his back using a combination of survey harness parts and her mother's equipment belt, checked all the connections twice herself, and then told him she was ready. They went low and slow over the snowfields every afternoon now, the settlement small beneath them, the plains wide and white and empty in all directions. Nadia kept her arms out. She was convinced this helped. It did not help aerodynamically. It helped in some other way that Soro had stopped trying to name. Dara Wren watched from the ground on most days with a thermos of something hot and the expression of a person doing complex internal arithmetic about the difference between danger and growth. She had decided, apparently, that this fell on the right side of that line. She did not stop it. Osek watched too, from the door of his converted survey unit, with a tablet and dried food and the posture of someone who was officially observing and unofficially just watching, because there was something about watching it that made the dried food taste less like a mistake. He had been writing a great deal lately, not compliance reports, something else. The conclave had not yet responded formally to the petition, but several of his old colleagues had contacted him quietly, asking questions, not procedural questions, but the other kind. The kind people ask when they are thinking around the edges of something they are not ready to say directly. He answered all of them. The formal response came on a morning when the sky was clearer than usual, the iron gray broken up into something lighter, almost blue. It came not as a document in the administrative channel. It came as a ship, a diplomatic vessel, the largest class the conclave used for direct envoy contact. It landed in the flat open ground north of the settlement with the deliberate care of something that understood its own weight. The diplomatic envoy who stepped out was not a name or shape Sora recognized. She was a species called the Aranith, tall, silver-skinned, slow-moving in the precise way of someone who has learned that slow movement reads as authority. She carried a sealed conclave document cylinder. Behind her, walking at a pace that was unhurried, in the way of the very old and very tired of hurrying, was Elder Vayek. Sora had not seen him since the chamber. Vayek looked the same, ancient, enormous, amber-eyed, copper-horned. He looked at Sora the way he had looked at him in the chamber, but this time without the stillness of someone deciding not to have an expression. This time there was simply an expression. It was complicated and quiet, and it said several things that neither of them would put into words. The envoy opened the document cylinder. In front of them all Sora, Nadia, Dara Wren, Osek, who had come out of his survey unit still holding his tablet, and the small group of settlement residents who had simply walked over because the diplomatic ship was the most interesting thing that had landed here in months. She read the amendment aloud in full. The language was formal and long, but the meaning was simple. The conclave had added a new provision to the charter. It was called the Wren provision. It stated that in cases where a voluntary bond had formed between members of different tier species, without force, without deception, without harm, and where that bond involved a minor of any recognized species, the conclave would not intervene. The bond would be reviewed by an independent cultural observer every 5 cycles, and the observer's report would be filed, and that was the entirety of the process. It was not a repeal. It was not an apology. It was a door opened 1 careful inch in a wall that had stood for 4 centuries. The envoy finished reading and rolled the document. Elder Vayek spoke. He said it was the first change to the sacred laws in 400 years. He said this to Sora, looking at him directly, and there was something in the way he said it that was not exactly pride. The Drail did not perform pride the way younger species did, but it was adjacent to it, in the specific way of someone who did not want to encourage recklessness and also could not entirely disapprove of the outcome. He said, "You were always going to be trouble." Sora said, "You always knew that." Vayek said, "Yes," a pause long and slow, "I am glad you were." Nadia had been standing beside Sora through all of this, listening. She was quiet in the particular way she was quiet when she was paying full attention, not still. She was never fully still. She was turning her stone over in her fingers, the amber one, the first one, the one from the ridge, but focused. When Vayek finished speaking, she walked toward him. Elder Vayek was the oldest living Drail in the known galaxy. He was 3,000 years and 7 months old. He had spoken before the conclave more than 400 times. 17 species considered him a figure of historical and ceremonial significance. He was larger than the survey unit Osek lived in. Nadia came up to the edge of his great foreleg, reached up, and held out a stone, white, smooth, rounded by glacial action over many years. She said it was for coming all this way. Elder Vayek looked at the stone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he bent his enormous head down, slowly, the way something very large moves when it is trying to be careful about something very small, and he took it. He held it in the tip of one claw, the way Sora had held the amber stone that first day on the ridge, and he straightened, and he said nothing, and he kept it. That evening Sora went to the ridge alone, not to observe, just to sit. The sky had gone dark, and the stars were out, thick and cold, and close seeming the way they only were from small, low-atmosphere worlds with no light pollution for 40 kilometers in any direction. Nadia came up behind him without making a sound, which she was now very good at. She sat down against his copper side, small and warm. She did not say anything for a while. Then she asked, "Are you still in trouble?" He thought about it honestly. The censure was still on record. The stripped rank was still gone. The conclave had passed the Wren provision, but had not formally closed his file. "Probably," he said. She nodded, satisfied. "Good. Boring people are never in trouble." He laughed. It came out low and rolling, like thunder moving away, the sound of it going across the flat white plains and fading into the dark. She had heard it dozens of times. It did not make her jump anymore. It had not made her jump in a long time. They sat on the ridge, the tiny copper dragon and the human child, and looked at all the stars, at the civilizations and laws and ancient silences distributed across the dark. Everything out there that was very sure of itself, very settled, very decided. One thing had changed, though. One provision in one charter, small as a single stone in a long row, placed by a child on a flat rock in the snow, because she had been certain something shy and orange would come back. She had been right. The galaxy kept turning, some laws stayed, one new law was born. And on a cold ridge on a frontier world, nothing moved and no one left, and that was enough.